During World War II, the United States military faced a monumental challenge of transporting wounded soldiers from remote battlefields to hospitals where they could receive life-saving care. While ships, trains, and ambulances played major roles in casualty evacuation, one method revolutionized battlefield medicine: air evacuation. At the beginning of the war, the idea of using airplanes to move patients was largely experimental. But as battles raged across the globe, in the jungles of the Pacific, deserts of North Africa, and beaches of Normandy, planes became essential lifelines for the wounded. From 1942 onward, the Air Transport Command, in cooperation with the Army Medical Department, began flying out casualties using cargo planes returning from the front lines. These flights weren't always scheduled or well-equipped early on. At first, medical personnel improvised, strapping patients to wooden or canvas litters inside stripped-down C-47 Dakotas or C-54 Skymasters. Despite lacking formal markings under the Geneva Convention and flying at low altitudes, these aircraft were rarely targeted. Over time, their interiors were adapted to hold racks for litters, oxygen tanks, and emergency kits containing blood plasma, morphine, splints, and bandages. As the system matured, entire squadrons dedicated to medical evacuation were formed, known as Medical Air Evacuation Transport Squadrons, MATES, and later Medical Air Evacuation Squadrons, MAES. These units included flight surgeons, nurses, and enlisted technicians. By late 1944, each squadron included 45 commissioned officers and over 200 enlisted men, supporting dozens of aircraft across theaters. Among the heroes of air evacuation were the flight nurses, trained in aeromedical emergencies, shock, hemorrhage, tracheotomy, and oxygen administration. They were often the only medical authority on board. These women carried heavy responsibilities and faced incredible danger. Some crash-landed under enemy fire, others parachuted to safety, and a few, like Lieutenant Reba Whittle, became POWs. 16 flight nurses lost their lives during the war. The numbers tell the story of a growing success. In 1943, air evacuations accounted for only 4.5% of medical transports. But by the end of 1944, that number surged to over 22% in some theaters. In just a few months of 1944, over 60,000 patients were flown out of Normandy alone, one-third of all American casualties in the region. The aircraft used varied. The twin-engine C-47 could hold up to 18 litters and was ideal for forward operations. The four-engine C-54 Skymaster had transatlantic range and was used to fly critically wounded patients from Europe back to the United States. Other lighter aircraft, like the UC-64 and L-5, were used to ferry single patients or deliver blood and medical supplies to remote aid stations. In Europe, planes picked up wounded soldiers at hastily constructed airstrips near the front and flew them to holding hospitals in England or France. In the Pacific, air evacuations carried patients from island battles to Australia, the New Hebrides, and eventually back to the U.S. mainland. On board, the wounded received not just rapid transportation, but actual care in flight, something unheard of before the war. Flight nurses monitored vitals, administered oxygen, handled sedation, and prevented shock. One nurse, Lieutenant Mary Louise Hawkins, even performed a tracheotomy mid-flight using tubing from a life vest. She saved her patient's life and received the Distinguished Flying Cross. The journey was rarely easy. Planes flew low to avoid decompression, which would be fatal for chest or abdominal wounds. Bumpy rides risked reopening wounds or breaking splints. Yet despite the risks, air evacuation dramatically reduced mortality rates among the wounded. What had once taken days by train or ship now took hours by air. Men with grave injuries were stabilized and treated within hours instead of being lost to time. The service was so effective that, by war's end, more than 1.3 million U.S. military personnel had been evacuated by air. Of those, approximately 5% were transoceanic flights to the United States, with the rest moved between combat zones and rear hospitals. The impact of air evacuation in World War II went far beyond the numbers. It shaped modern emergency medical transport and proved that wounded soldiers could not only survive but recover if help arrived fast enough. The success of the system laid the foundation for today's medevac helicopters, trauma flights, and global emergency care networks. In a war filled with innovation, air evacuation stands out as one of the most important medical advances of the 20th century. It didn't just change the course of medicine. It saved lives one flight at a time. The logistics of planning an air evacuation mission during World War II were formidable. Each mission required coordination between battlefield medics, evacuation hospitals, engineers, and air crews. Roads and landing strips needed to be secured or quickly constructed. Radios buzzed constantly with updates about changing front lines, weather, and the status of casualties awaiting transport. Airfields were often carved out of raw terrain, sometimes nothing more than dirt strips in France, Italy, or the Pacific Islands. Loading a wounded soldier onto a plane wasn't as simple as hoisting them aboard. Flight medics and orderlies had to maneuver litters into the aircraft while minimizing pain and motion, often in the rain, mud, or snow. Once inside, flight nurses monitored vital signs, administered basic first aid, and provided comfort in flight. Though they lacked the full range of supplies found in ground hospitals, their presence made a life-saving difference. But the conditions weren't easy. These nurses flew without modern pressurization or heating. In some cases, patients suffered from altitude sickness, frostbite, or worsening shock due to the high-altitude flights. Still, the benefits outweighed the risks. A plane could get a patient from Normandy to England in under an hour, what might have taken a day by road or train. The program's success was proven in numbers. By the end of the war, the Air Evacuation Service had transported over 1.3 million patients. Shockingly, fewer than 60 patients died in flight, a testament to the skill of the flight medics and nurses, and the rapid response times enabled by aviation. Another crucial point: many patients were transported without significant pain medication. Morphine syrettes were carried in limited supply, used only when absolutely necessary. Flight nurses were trained to recognize when to administer morphine, but the challenges of altitude and limited monitoring meant they had to be cautious. In some cases, patients endured excruciating wounds without anything stronger than sulfa powder and bandages. This harsh reality made the work of flight crews even more vital. By war's end, air evacuation had proven itself not just as an experiment, but as a cornerstone of modern battlefield medicine. What began with a few test flights in North Africa and Burma had become a global network of airfields, medical teams, and transport aircraft. The same methods and lessons would shape medevac protocols in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. And I would like to make an acknowledgement to thank all of you for getting me to 1,000 subscribers.